This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/Wondery.
The Prosecutors is brought to you by Progressive. Progressive helps you compare direct auto rates from a variety of companies so you can find a great one, even if it's not with them. Quote today at Progressive.com to find a rate that works with your budget. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations.
Hello, everyone. This is Mike.
And this is Gibby.
And we're the hosts of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. If you haven't already, we'd love to invite you to come check us out. Starting in January of 2017, we've amassed over 230 episodes of some of the most intriguing unsolved cases in true crime history. We cover some of the very big unsolved cases, but we also like to cover some of the lesser known cases, some that you may have never heard of. We dive into the details. We talk about the victims, their life, the circumstances around their disappearance or murder, and we cover the potential suspects and persons of interest. We try to give you all the known facts you need to satisfy your amateur detective. We like to think that we don't take ourselves all that seriously, but we take true crime very seriously. You can listen to True Crime All the Time Unsolved now on Podcast One, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
You know you want to.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on the Prosecutors, we continue and maybe conclude our look at the death of Ellen Greenberg. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my L'Amiga Alice co-host, Alice.
Wow, Brett. I literally don't know what to say in response. That was beautiful, first of all. Beautiful pronounced, even though I have no idea if you said it correctly.
I have no idea if I pronounced it correctly, but I thought it sounded good, too. It sounded like,
What was that?
It
that
means
was really
lucky.
Nice.
Lucky. Because you're lucky to have me, Alice.
Okay,
I think that's what I meant.
You went there. I was about to say that, but it's not as good when you say it. You really should wait for the other person to compliment you, Brett. I don't know how to tell you this.
Next time.
Next time you use that word.
Yes, exactly. So
that I really am lucky. Can I tell you why?
Why?
I'm incredibly lucky because you are my best friend, and we've gotten to work together now, not just on the podcast, but like in our, brick and mortar job for how many years now? What is this? 5 years? 5?
5 years.
We're old. I thought it was like yesterday we started working together. But
well, we are old, or at least
we
I
are
am.
old. Well, we actually are old, but everyone knows from our discussion of VCRs and taping. But I've gotten to work with you for 5 years, and that's about to end.
It is sad.
I know.
Sad day on the Prosecutors. You're about to become the prosecutor.
We are now the prosecutor and Alice.
And Alice. I mean, I think prosecutor is kind of like senator or president. You remain prosecutor forever. And there's way too much intellectual property and value in that S. So we're keeping the S regardless.
Well, if we remove the S, would I lose part in the partnership that we have? Maybe it's a legal thing. Yeah. So you better not remove the S. So everyone, I am after like a decade in public service, leaving my current position. And it's not because of Brett, it's in spite of Brett. But I'm no longer going to be a prosecutor for now. We'll see what the future holds. But I am moving to another position. I'll still be practicing law. I'll still be doing litigation, just in a different way. But you know what? I'm kind of excited I get to keep living my prosecutor life by night in my closet, recording with you, because we're going to continue to do this. And we're going to continue to use our expertise the way we have in analyzing these cases. So nothing about this podcast changes. But before Reddit jumps all over my LinkedIn profile and says that I'm not a real prosecutor, I wanted to be the first to tell you, soon I will not be a prosecutor by salary. I don't even know what that means.
Definitely by salary, but by trade. You're always a prosecutor at heart, Alice. And look, this is just going to make the podcast even more well-rounded, because now you're going to be in private practice and we're going to get that view of things. So I think it's great. It is great. This is a great opportunity for Alice. We're all very proud of her and excited for her. She's going to be doing awesome things. Alice is awesome, is all you know, and she's highly in demand. And she finally gave in. I just couldn't keep her there anymore. But it's okay. The best part of this is I don't have to work for Alice anymore. So yes.
Oh, ouch. Okay. Well, now I know how you really feel.
No longer my boss.
I am currently still your boss for a couple more days.
For a couple more days. That's right. That's right.
Anyway, so that's our news today. It's really not that groundbreaking, and most of you probably don't even care. But I wanted to be upfront with you guys and let you know. And again, nothing's going to change about the podcast unless Brett removes the S from prosecutors, and then it becomes the prosecutor and associates.
And associates, yes. Well, Alice, on behalf of all the listeners, thank you for all your service to our great country. Alice has been in public service her entire career, and no one deserves this more than her. So we're very proud of you, and we won't dwell on this because I know everybody came for Ellen Greenberg and not Alice life news, but we figured you guys would want to know, so we're sharing that, and I'm sad. So if I'm sad throughout the episode, you guys will know why. But it's okay. I'm over it. I'm recovering.
We're also sad because we're talking about a horrendous death.
That's true. That is also true. That is sad as well. So this is just a sad episode all the way around. But this is our 4th episode. It could be our final episode. We're not entirely sure. There's a lot left to talk about.
I'm going to go ahead and say, Brett, that it's going to be real ambitious of us to finish today. But we're not going to rush it because we care about this case.
No, we're not going to rush it. We will never rush through anything. That is our promise to you. And I think we keep that promise pretty often. So no one thinks we've never been accused of rushing through a case. That is something I can definitely say.
Says the podcast who did 9 episodes and then someone, John Benet Ramsey.
Exactly. And look, I think by this point, everybody has strong feelings on this. The debate about this case has been crazy. You guys are really invested in this. It's been incredible to see the discussion about this case and the things you think about this case. And I think the things we're going to talk about today only deepen the mystery and make it more difficult to really figure out what's going on here. There are people who have strong views on this case about whether this is a murder or suicide. And honestly, it's one of those things where as we go through the evidence today and as we've gone through the evidence in every episode, it feels like you keep getting pulled back and forth, right? Every time you're like, it's absolutely a murder. And then you see a piece of evidence that makes you think, I don't know. And we're going to continue that today. We talked about the 911 call yesterday. Let's talk about how Ellen's body was found. And I think it's appropriate to discuss this after the 911 call because we know how Sam described her body. And is that what we see? According to police reports, Ellen was found sitting on the floor with her head and upper body, shoulders, resting against the kitchen cabinets. Now, let's just stop right there. If you didn't know that, if you haven't heard anything else about this case, if you haven't read the police reports, that might come as a surprise to you because the state of Ellen's body and how it's found is utterly inconsistent with how Sam describes it to the 911 operator, at least in my view. When I listened to the 911 call, we went through it in detail last week, it sounds to me like Ellen is laying flat on her back. And in fact, I think Sam even says that. At one point, the operator says, "Are you willing to do CPR?" "Yes." "So get her flat on her back. Bare her chest, okay? You want to rip her shirt off." And it appears that that's what's happening, right? I mean, it's not until Sam starts to take off her shirt that he realizes that she has a knife stuck and her chest. Earlier on, the 911 operator says, "Is she flat on her back?" Sam responds, "She's on her back. Do I bring her?" And then she interrupts him.
And that's so interesting, Brett, because take this whole conversation into context. We listened to the call last time. We discussed it at length. We went through the transcript of it. So Brett kind of just recapped some of the important parts about the positioning of her body. But think about what's actually happening then. He is on the call, presumably freaking out because he finds his fiance dead, and talking as if he were in a heightened sense of stress to this 911 operator, staring at her dead body, and not doing anything. Now, what this tells you is something we already know now, but this confirms that he was alone when he made this call. Because can you imagine if the doorman was standing next to him and Sam is on the phone saying, "Oh yeah, she's flat on her back," and the doorman's like, "What are you talking about? She's still sitting right there. You haven't even touched her." And so the fact that he's talking through these things as if he's doing it, but it's inconsistent with how the police found her, means that everything you heard in his voice, any sort of anxiety, any sort of shock, any sort of whatever, is being said as he looks at her body, not touching her and doing the things that he's saying he's doing on the 911 call, which is just something to keep in mind. It can go either way, but it is a strange situation. In other words, the call doesn't match what was physically happening at the time.
And when I listen to the call, and I think when most people listen to the call, you sort of imagine she's laying on her back, she's on the ground, he's sort of next to her, maybe sort of over her. I mean, he's getting ready to do CPR. He's being told how to do it, but that isn't how her body's found. And what's going on here? You can imagine in your head exactly how she's sitting. And especially if you look at the photographs, we're going to put a photograph of the crime scene online. You would think it'd be super bloody. It's actually not. There is some blood, but very little. And when you see it, this sort of L-shaped kitchen, you can imagine what that looks like. You can totally imagine how she was sitting up against the cabinets, sort of leaned back against the cabinets with this knife sticking out of her chest. And that's just not what he says in the 911 call. So why this inconsistency? I don't know if it's important. It's hard for me to even to imagine why he would lie about that, why he would say that she was on her back when she's not. I don't have a reason for that, just off the top of my head. Alice, I don't know if you have any theories on that.
I got nothing. I really don't know. This is just confusing.
It really feels like a just gratuitous falsehood. And I know if you want to be charitable to him, like you said, he's freaking out. The love of his life is on the ground. But even more reason, just when she says, "Is she on her back?" Say, "No, she's leaning against the cabinets." Do I need to put her on the ground? Do I need to, it doesn't make any sense.
We have situations where the person, even if they love the victim, they're like, "I don't know, I can't touch her. I don't want to hurt her. There's so much blood. Please don't make me touch her. I can't do this right now." That's perfectly fine. And we've seen that happen before because you've never seen, your loved one in this state. They look like they're dead. You're afraid if you move them, you're going to contribute to them dying faster. But none of that happened. He talked as if he were following through with the actions that the 911 operator was telling him to do with Ellen.
I mean, he literally says she's on her back. She's not. If the police found her in the same state that she was in when he was on the 911 call, she is not flat on her back. So, I don't know.
And here's the thing. Let's say that he did put her on her back. This would only mean that he would have pulled Ellen back up to sitting position, which is strange because once he notices the knife, the operator's like, "Don't touch anything. Don't remove anything." Basically, it's like, just don't touch her anymore because that knife, if it gets removed, she could bleed out. All these situations. And so essentially she was like, "Don't do anything." So it would be strange for him to then pull her back up to sitting, which, by the way, we see this especially when you have a loved one end up killing someone else. We've talked about this with parents and children. Once the murder is complete, the parent, if it's the parent murdering the child, wants to almost protect the child and put them in a restful position, like laying down as if they were sleeping with a favorite blanket around them, not prop them up in this uncomfortable, stilted position that's unnatural and kind of highlights the fact that something has gone terribly wrong. And so this is not even within the psychology of what you do when you're in shock that a loved one is dead or dying.
And I guess another possibility is that the police reports are wrong, but
that would be a big thing to get wrong in your police report.
That would be a big thing to get wrong, that she's propped up against the cabinets instead of laying flat on her back. That would be a big thing to get wrong. But in any event, we could talk about that forever, not get anywhere, so let's move on a little bit. In addition to this, so she's sort of resting against the kitchen cabinets, at least the upper part of her body. We know there is this knife that is embedded through her clothing, and we also know that her glasses are near her body. She has a scrunchie on her wrist, and maybe strangest of all, in her left hand, she is holding a white bathroom towel that has no blood on it, even though there's blood all around her and on the kitchen cabinet. Some people asked us if we knew whether she was right-handed or left-handed, and I actually asked Gavin Fish that as well. Nobody really knew, but reading this would seem to tell you that if she stabbed herself, or if she was going to stab herself, she would have used her right hand, because she's holding this towel in her left hand. How it doesn't have any blood on it, I don't know. Why she's holding it, I can't say. It's a weird thing. I don't find the scrunchie to be weird, because women do that all the time, but the towel thing is just another sort of inexplicable thing. Once we get to theories in this case, there's sort of a possibility that people have raised that we'll get to, but it is hard to say why she would have a bathroom towel in her hand and how it has no blood on it.
Yeah, because remember, she's in the kitchen, and based on her surroundings, it looks like she was preparing fruit before this happened. And so there are probably kitchen towels in the kitchen, and the bathroom towel, you use it for different things. Everyone's different, but especially with a white bathroom towel, typically you don't like clean up the kitchen, which is pretty dirty in terms of food colorings on it, because you try to keep your bath towels, white. And I don't know, with the number of stabs, which is 20, with a knife going in and out, in and out, in and out, you would think that some splatter would have gotten onto the towel if it were with her body while she was getting stabbed, whether by someone else or by herself. And it just seems so stark because it's a color that would make blood stand out. So it's not like, well, it's a patterned towel, maybe there's some blood we can't quite see. It's pretty stark here that there's no blood on it. And the fact that she's holding it, obviously you can manipulate someone's hand to hold something. So it's hard to know whether she was holding it before she lost consciousness or not. Do you know anything about that, Brett?
Well, the thing that's weird about it is, why would you stage it? Like, let's say someone murdered her. Why put a bath towel in her hand? I don't know why she would be holding it if she committed suicide. If anybody has a theory on that, I'd be happy to hear it. But I also don't know why a murderer would put the towel in her hand. And this is the weird thing about this case, and people have brought this up in some of the discussions. There's a lot of stuff in this case that just doesn't make sense, no matter what happened. Whether it's a suicide or whether it's a murder, there's just some weird things that happened in this case, and this is one of them. I don't have a good answer for this, whether she was killed or whether she killed herself. I have no idea. The fact it doesn't have blood on it is a weird thing. I don't know how that happened. The thing is, it's pretty clear she didn't stab herself and then walk into the bathroom and get the towel and come back out and then collapse. And there would have been blood elsewhere in the house if she did that, and there is no blood in the bathroom. There's no evidence of cleanup or anything like that. So it seems like, for some reason, she had a bathroom towel in the kitchen, which, I don't want to do the thing where we put ourselves in other people's shoes again, but I don't know that I've ever taken a bathroom towel into the kitchen. I don't really know why you would do that. I guess you just ran out of paper towels and kitchen towels, and you needed a towel for some purpose, so you went to get it. But once again, imagine this is a suicide. Unless you can sort of come up with a reason for why she would have the towel that's somehow related to the suicide, this is one of those things that kind of points to me that it's not a suicide. Because you have to imagine that she went into the bathroom for some reason. Imagine there's some perfectly plausible, ordinary, just simple explanation for this we're not seeing. She goes in the bathroom, she gets a towel, she comes back to where her blueberries and her peeled oranges, and then she decides to stab herself to death at that point. As we've said, spontaneous suicides happen, but I don't know that they're ever that spontaneous, that literally she's just going about her day, and then she decides to stab herself to death for no apparent reason, such that she doesn't even put down the towel before she does it. You have to believe that she just held onto the towel while she was stabbing herself 20 times. Many of these stabbings very painful, and didn't get any blood on the towel. It's very strange.
Here's the other thing. I know in the first episode we went through all the 20 stabs, and I'm sitting here as I'm talking about the 20 stabs trying to recreate it on myself. And I can imagine stabbing myself with one hand. First of all, I can't really imagine stabbing myself in the back of the neck and the head in the way she was stabbed, but I can imagine using one hand because of the weird angle. But the chest area, I mean, feel your own chest. The reason you have a rib cage is to protect all your very sensitive organs there, your heart, your lungs, etc. And so there's a rib cage there. It takes force to puncture it for your own safety. And oftentimes when you see someone inflict a self-inflicted chest stab wound, it takes force, so much so that it usually takes two hands. I mean, if you can imagine, one hand's gripping the handle of the knife and the other one is almost pushing the knife in because it takes force to stuff it into yourself. Here, because she's holding a completely snow white bath towel in the left hand, it seems to suggest that she did all of the stabbing with just one hand, including the ones in the front, which have a rib cage in the way. And we believe that at least the chest wounds came last because the knife was sticking out of her chest. So this would be after she is probably in some ways heavily impaired from her spinal cord, trying to, probably with weak hands, if any sort of consciousness at this point, stabbing her chest with just one hand while still hanging on to this towel, and no sort of reflex instinct is causing her hand gripping the white towel to come near her body, which has all the blood on her.
So the other thing about this, the scene that's interesting, we talked about in the first episode, and we've talked about this a couple times, that whatever happened here was a rage-filled killing. Whether she killed herself or whether she was killed by somebody, this was, if it was a murder, it was like a blitz attack. There is fury in this. Whoever did it, whether it was her or whether it was somebody else, there was fury here. Another piece of evidence for that. We talked about this steak knife. Where did it come from? It came from the apartment. In fact, it came from the knife block that was sitting on the kitchen counter. The knife block was overturned on the counter, and some other knives were in the sink, which tells me whoever grabbed that knife, when they did it, this is not pull the knife out, thought about what they're going to do, and then stab themselves or stab somebody. This is somebody grabbed that knife with such force that they knocked the knife block over. Other knives went clattering into the sink, and then the stabbing began. That's how this went down. It was an angry, vicious, rage-filled thing, whoever was holding the knife.
Yeah, I overturned my knife block today just to see the amount. And most knife blocks are the same, right? There's kind of like an angle to it. And the reason it's angled is so that the knives don't fall out. And also it gives stability to the actual knife block, because the knife block obviously holds a lot of sharp objects, and it would behoove you to have a knife block that is structurally stable. And it took some effort to knock my knife block over, right? I had to actually push it in a way that I intended to knock it over. I have never accidentally, maybe y'all have, grabbed a knife like to peel an orange or something and accidentally turned over my knife block because its structural integrity is such that it physically doesn't fall over. And so what I'm imagining is just a complete grab from the side, whether it was by her or by somebody else. So much so that it knocks it over and causes these other knives to fall out into the sink. And then not taking the time, I'm just imagining the clatter. It would certainly shock me, right? Like if I were doing it myself, if I accidentally knocked the knife block over, it would kind of jar me awake in a way. And not to say that you wouldn't continue a spontaneous suicide, but it is such a loud and shocking event that it could jar you out of whatever kind of element you are in emotionally at that time.
And we had some people who reached out to us. We have such great listeners, and they've had some really interesting experiences and some tough experiences in certain circumstances. And the fact that they're willing to share them with us always blows my mind. But we had some people who wrote in with their experiences with this sort of spontaneous suicide thing, and people who were in a situation where they almost succumbed to this. One person who said they were literally standing in their kitchen with a knife and to their wrist when their roommate came in. And it was one of those things, it's kind of like Alice was saying, they didn't even realize they were doing it until their roommate came in, and it kind of shocked them out of it. And they're like, oh my God, what did I almost do? Because they were in a place that was pretty dark, and if they had taken their own life, it would have been this kind of thing where nobody saw it coming because they didn't know what they were dealing with, and they took that action, but they were kind of shocked out of it, and the moment passed and they were fine, and they went and got some help, and things are much better now. And So what Alice is saying actually is kind of interesting. Just depending on how this went down, maybe just the shock of that might have been something that, were this some sort of spontaneous suicide, would kind of snapped you out of it. Not necessarily, obviously. But I think what we can say for certain is when this happened, like Al said, there was some force behind this. There was some anger behind this. And I think it says something about what led up to it, whether it's a suicide or whether it's a murder.
And along with all of this, let's talk about the blood that was found here, because according to police reports and consistent with photos that were taken by the police, quote, the blood around her is generally confined to the area of the body, on the floor underneath, and on the face of the cabinets behind her. The only blood above Ellen are 2 drops of blood splatter on the countertop. This would seem to indicate that after she was stabbed, either by herself or someone else, basically after like the first stab, she went down to the ground, and then the rest of the stabbing occurred while she was basically stationary on the ground. And if she'd been standing when stabbing herself, you'd actually expect much more blood at a much higher level, because you have to remove the blade. And we've talked about this a lot, especially in the staircase, the Michael Peterson case about blood splatter. When you take that knife out, you're going to be pulling things out with you, and they can be microscopic. You may not even be able to see them with your eye, but it comes out with the blade and kind of gets all around. There's a radius that it hits, and there is no such thing here. Really, it's a very low crime scene. Go look at the picture of this. It's very interesting that there's just these 2 drops of blood on the counter, which would make sense if she were standing at the counter peeling her orange or getting her fruit ready, and that first stab comes. She goes straight down, and then the rest of the 19 stabs happen at almost ground level where she is at this point.
And it's interesting you mentioned Michael Peterson, because Dr. Henry Lee is going to make an appearance in this case, and he has looked at the blood spatter, and as we'll talk about later, thinks it's pretty weird. And like I said, we're going to put this picture online, and we're going to, if you're on YouTube, you've probably already seen it. It's a crime scene photo. There's blood. It is nowhere near as gruesome as you might expect it to be, given that there are 20 stab wounds here.
It is not nearly as bloody as the Michael Peterson crime scene photo.
No, nowhere
near. Right? I mean, there was enough blood in that case where there was slipping, like there were marks on the ground where someone slipped on the blood. Here, it's kind of weird because you see a lot of blood close to the oven, close to the cabinet, I guess. And then there's like these very distinct blood splotches, as if they were dripping from the tip of a knife, almost like in a trail, and not that many smudges. So you guys have probably watched some gory horror flicks where you see fingerprints that are bloody as they're smeared across the window because the victim's trying to get away from their attacker, and they're running their bloody hand against the wall as they run, and they drag all this like smeared blood everywhere with them. That's not the case here. And I think this is going to go into our theory later as to what happened. If Ellen were fighting an attacker, you may expect, first of all, defensive wounds that we don't see, and also you may expect some sort of smearing all around as she's trying to move away from her attacker. And we really don't see that here. The blood is actually like congealed, seemingly where they were dropped.
There's a couple interesting things about this. Number one, and I just noticed this, there's a towel hanging from the oven. So you know how like your oven handle that you use to open the oven, you often put a towel there? There's one there.
A kitchen towel.
A kitchen towel. So it is not the case that she ran out of towels in the kitchen and needed one from the bathroom. There is one right there. So once again, it just makes that whole bath towel situation even weirder. Not sure what's going on there. Haven't thought about it. I'll get to that later. But those of you who thought, oh, come on, guys, she just needed a towel, and so she had to go to the bathroom to get it. Nope, there's one right there. And when you look at the photo, you'll see it. The other thing that's interesting, there is a lot of controversy about these stab wounds, not surprisingly. One of the controversies is, are some of them post-mortem? So there have been experts who've looked at this who've said that some of the stab wounds do not show hemorrhaging. And as we've said before, and as all of you who follow true crime know, if a wound doesn't bleed, it means the person was dead when it was inflicted. The heart's not pumping. This is a weird thing, and it's really hard to wrap your head around because you just think, live or dead, if I cut into your body, blood's going to come out. And to some extent, that's true. But to really get bleeding, you need your heart to be pumping and pushing that blood so that it continues to flow and it continues to flow out of the body. And once you're deceased, stab wounds are not going to bleed. Looking at this photo makes you wonder, could that be an explanation? Why are there so little blood in this crime scene? Remember, we talked about the staircase. Why was there so much blood there? Because she had a wound to her head. Well, guess what? So did Ellen. Ellen had a deep wound to her head, a stab wound that went all the way basically to her brain. You would think that would have bled pretty bad, but you don't see that. Multiple stab wounds. The one in the chest, obviously the knife was never removed. So also, never dealt with anybody getting stabbed, but I've seen enough movies to know that you never remove the knife. Jeffrey McDonald, you never remove the knife because if you remove the knife, they're going to bleed more. Obviously, the knife was still in her chest, so that's an explanation for why there's not more blood coming out of that wound. But stab wounds to the abdomen that went all the way to the liver. Yes, there were a few shallow wounds, but there were plenty of wounds that were over an inch deep that should have bled, I would think, more than they did. And when you look at this picture, you're going to be shocked. You're going to be shocked that somebody could be stabbed 20-something time with at least 10 of those being fairly serious stab wounds and not bleed any more than they bled in this picture. And once again, you'll see the 2 drops on the counter. If she was standing there stabbing herself in the back of the neck or in the chest or in the stomach, there would have been more blood. I'm sorry, there would have been more blood at a higher level getting cast off from that knife, something. You don't see that, which means she was essentially sitting there where she was found, stabbing herself. And this makes it even more complicated than what we've been saying. We've been asking you to try and stab yourself in the back of the neck. Now imagine that you are slumped down on the floor with your back and back of your head up against some counters, and you're having to stab yourself in the back of the neck. You have to believe she did that. You have to believe she did that, or you have to believe that she could stab herself in the back of the head and the back of the neck multiple times, 8, 9 times, and there'd be 2 drops of blood on the counter, and that's it. The Prosecutors is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Let's face it, sometimes multitasking can be overwhelming. Like when your favorite podcast is playing and the person next to you is talking and your car fan is blasting, all while you're trying to find the perfect parking spot. But then again, sometimes multitasking is easy, like quoting with Progressive Insurance. They do the hard work of comparing rates so you can find a great rate that works for you, even if it's not with them. Give their nifty comparison tool a try and you might just find getting the rate and coverage you deserve is easy.
All you need to do is visit Progressive's website to get a quote with all the coverages you want, like comprehensive and collision coverage or personal injury protection. Then you'll see Progressive's direct rate, and their tool will provide options from other companies all lined up and ready to compare, so it's simple to choose the rate and coverages you like. Press play on comparing auto rates. Quote at Progressive.com to join the over 27 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
Alice, we've got a very different kind of sponsor for this episode, The Jordan Harbinger Show, a podcast you should definitely check out since you're a fan of high-quality, fascinating podcasts hosted by interesting people. The show covers such a wide range of topics through weekly interviews with heavy-hitting guests. And there are a ton of episodes you'll find interesting since you're a fan of this show. And there's an episode for everyone. The show covers stories like how a professional art forger somehow made millions of dollars while being chased by the feds and the mafia. Jordan's also done an episode all about birth control and how it can alter the partners we pick and how going on or off the pill can change elements of our personalities.
And Brett, I know our listeners will love his Jordan Harbinger True Crime Starter Pack. You can learn about Frank Abagnale, Scam Me If You Can, to The Secret Life of an American Art Forger. The podcast covers a lot, but one constant is Jordan's ability to pull useful pieces of advice from his guests. I promise you'll find something useful that you can apply to your own life. We really enjoyed this show, and we think you will as well. Search for The Jordan Harbinger Show. That's HARB as in boy, IN as in Nancy, GER on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Alice, I've been listening a lot lately to Turnpike Troubadours. I'm fascinated by their fascination with Domino's and the fact that they managed to rhyme chicken consomme in one of their songs. And they sound even better on my Raycon wireless earbuds. And look, if you guys are looking for something that is stylish, that looks, feels, and sounds better than ever, Raycon's everyday earbuds are for you. They have optimized gel tips for the perfect in-ear fit, and these earbuds are so comfortable they will not budge. Trust me. Raycons give you 8 hours of playtime and a 32-hour battery life. So whether you're going to the gym or whether you just want to relax and listen to some tunes, Raycons are for you, and they are priced just right at half the price of other premium audio brands, and that's a reason they have 50,000 five-star reviews.
Absolutely, Brett. I love my Raycon earbuds, and I use them when listening to podcasts, music, and even taking my conference calls. What's really cool is there are 3 customizable sound profiles, and I don't even have to go anywhere but my earbuds to tap functions like answer a call, hang up a call, increase the volume, decrease the volume, all within my earbud. And what's really great is there's noise isolation, so I can really focus in on what I'm listening to. Go to buyraycon.com today and use code prosecutors15 to get 15% off your Raycon order. That's code prosecutors15 at buyraycon.com to score 15% off. Buyraycon.com, code prosecutors15. Brett, as the summer's winding down and my kids are going back to school, it seems like everything is getting busier with soccer practices starting and work heating up. And it's such a struggle to get dinner on the table every night. And that's why I'm so excited to talk about HelloFresh, my meal kit choice, because it helps me get healthy, delicious meals delivered to my doorstep and onto my table. Recently, I made firecracker meatballs and my boys absolutely gobbled it up. There were no leftovers whatsoever, even though the portions were huge. Now, more than ever, we're looking for ways to save money. And in fact, HelloFresh is 25% less expensive than takeout and is even cheaper than grocery shopping too. You really can't beat that. I mean, HelloFresh is here to make your hectic fall weeknights a little easier and a lot more delicious. Their quick and easy meals, including 20-minute meals, low prep, and easy cleanup options, take the stress out of mealtime with time-saving, no-fuss recipes ready in a snap.
And you guys who know me know that I can't stop talking about HelloFresh and how much I love it. And there is a reason for that. It works with your schedule. Plans are flexible. You can change your meal preferences. You can update your delivery day. Even change your address with just a few taps on the HelloFresh app. There is no easier way to provide fresh, healthy, delicious meals for you and your family than HelloFresh. So go to HelloFresh.com/TP16 and use code TP16 for 16 free meals across 7 boxes and 3 free gifts. That's HelloFresh.com/TP16, code TP16 for 16 free meals across 7 boxes and 3 free gifts. And remember, Green Chef is now owned by HelloFresh, and with a wider array of meal plans to choose from, there is something for everyone. We love switching between the brands, and our listeners can enjoy both brands at a discount on us. So go to HelloFresh.com/TP16. Use code TP16 and find out for yourself why HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit.
So I'm going to say a couple of obvious things. I think you're right, or at least that's a very good observation, that the lack of blood may be because some of these stab wounds came post-mortem. It's really hard to stab yourself when you're dead, right? I know that seems obvious, but we're trying to talk about, we're trying to say whether this is a suicide or a murder. And the other thing is, this seems to actually go right in line with the knife block rage theory that we have, that it took a lot of rage kind of to grab that knife and knock the knife block over. Because there are some really, really intense wounds. A brain stab, a liver stab, a neck, spine stab, and a heart stab. I mean, those are all kill shots, right? And there is no stopping. If, in fact, she died or her heart stopped beating before the last of these 20 stabs, it would have been pretty obvious she was not fighting back. We knew she wasn't fighting back because she has no defensive wounds. She is probably completely limp, leaning against the cabinets, and these stabs continue to come at a vigorous rate and force. Right? That last one is plunged into the heart. It's not like it was a superficial cut in the last one. It's not like you do your first 5 big stabs and then the next 15 are kind of just superficial. You're, drawing on her skin. All 20 are interspersed in the way that they come, where the very last one is probably that real kill shot. You even leave the knife in her. And that just speaks of so much rage to me.
And I just want to come back to this. I've looked at this photo, but that's why I love doing this podcast with you, Alice, because I feel like when we talk about these cases and we look at this stuff, I always see things I didn't see before. And you mentioned those drops. And if you are looking at this photo right now, I want you to imagine Ellen on the ground, leaned up against these cabinets. And imagine someone else is the murderer, and they have the knife in their hand, and they're stabbing her. They're stabbing her in the chest. They're stabbing her in the stomach. And then look at those drops of blood that seem to lead away from wherever the body is. I mean, to me, those drops of blood look like what would happen if you stabbed somebody and you pulled the knife out and you held the knife there for a second. And little drops of blood are falling off the knife onto the ground, and then you stab them again. I mean, that's what it looks like to me. Now, I'm a lawyer. I am not I'm not a blood spatter expert. I've got as much expertise as Dwayne Deaver on this stuff. But when I look at this, that just the common sense thing, that's what I see.
Absolutely, Brett. I mean, I think you can see there's no blood in the middle because that's where her body was. So the blood drops, and we said they look like they congealed where they dripped, so there's no smearing. It's not like her leg straightened all of a sudden or her hand moved and smeared those drops. They dried where they were dropped, and they look so pinpoint, it's like they dripped off the tip of a knife. That's exactly what it looks like, and it looks like it's a semicircle around her body, like you're making your way around her body from the back to the front as you're deciding where next to make the kill shot, where to plunge the knife next. The fact that those are such thick drops of circular congealed blood lets me think that there was some weighting, right? Because blood is viscous. It doesn't flow like water. There's thickness to it. It takes some time for it to actually drip down. And I almost see the knife being held by someone's side as they decide, okay, got the neck, got the brain. Let's get the front now. And walking towards around her, semicircle, before raising the knife and plunging it again. That's what I see in this picture.
Yeah, it's something. I want all y'all to take a look at this photo, unless you're very squeamish about blood, because there's just not a lot of blood. Take a look at this photo.
I'm squeamish, but you guys, there's really not that much blood here, which is what's so interesting about it. But let's talk about other blood, and specifically on Ellen's face, because further complicating things, Ellen had a line of coagulated blood that ran from the right side of her nose to the left ear. That would mean that at some point, her body was laying on its left side long enough for the blood to travel in that direction and coagulate before her body was found. And it would also mean that she was laying down at some point and someone put her body back upright against the cabinet after she'd been on her side, letting that blood drip to the side, coagulate, and then propped back up.
And given what Sam says in the 911 call, I don't know how you can conclude that Ellen's body wasn't moved. It just seems like she obviously was moved. And maybe there's an innocent explanation for why it was moved, but somebody moved it. I'm not sure who it was, but somebody moved it. And between his own eyewitness account, what he's telling us on recorded telephone call, according to him, if you believe him, she's laying flat on her back. He says that. And that would explain this, right? This would, if she were, not really, because she'd kind of be on her side, but nevertheless, more in the prone position than slumped up against the cabinets. But I don't know. This is one of those things that Ellen's parents, they've hired investigators, they've looked at this stuff. This is one of the things they point to that to them just says there's more to this than what we know. And I think that is one of the most important things to keep coming back to. whatever happened here, we don't have all the facts. There have been things that we don't know that were never revealed, either because there wasn't an investigation or because people have not been telling us everything. And this is just another example of a piece of evidence that does not line up with what we've been told about how Ellen was found and whether or not her body was moved after she was killed. And maybe that seems insignificant to you, but to me, this is one of those things where if we are being misled in one part, that makes me wonder about everything else. It casts doubt on everything else we're told if there are parts of this story that aren't true. And it makes you wonder, why are parts of the story untrue? If this is a simple suicide, why would anybody mislead us about any of this stuff? If Sam came in and, like a sort of typical loving person, grabbed Ellen up and tried to, I don't know, cradle her or something, just tell us that. You don't have to act like you didn't touch her. You don't have to act like her body was laying flat on the ground. I don't know. It's just, like I said, it may be a minor thing. It may not matter, but it tells me that we're not being told the entirety of this story.
Yeah. What we do know is, like we said earlier, blood travels slower than water, and so she had to have been there long enough for it to drip and for her not to react. So it's not smeared blood, it's a one line as if it were just pulled by gravity. There's no wiping it off your face, there's no smearing or smudging. It traveled in that direction and then stayed there long enough to coagulate before she was moved, which, we haven't said this possibility, but I guess she could have propped herself back up. But I seriously doubt it based on kind of the seriousness of the wound and that nothing was smeared or disturbed. Nothing around her seems to indicate that she was slipping or trying to push up from her position. Like we saw, honestly, in the Michael Peterson case, right? It looked like maybe someone was trying to push. There was kind of smearing footprints as if someone was trying to get up.
Right. She had blood on the bottom of her feet. There was sort of a sign of movement. You don't have this here. As we said, looking at that photo, it just doesn't look like anything was disturbed, which makes it weird that it's kind of like the towel. How is it possible that her body was in one position and was moved, and there's no real evidence of it being moved? Another strange thing. I don't know. I mean, like I said, there are things going on in this case that are difficult to wrap your head around, and it's why this is just not a clear-cut case. I mean, if you think this is obviously murder, if it's obviously suicide, good for you. To me, there are so many little mysteries that it's hard for me to land on anything in particular. We talked a lot about murder, and we've talked a lot about the reasons to think this is a murder. Let's talk a little bit about reasons to think this is suicide, and that really starts with Ellen's state of mind at the time. So at the end of 2010, Ellen had begun to struggle with something. It's not entirely clear what it was. According to her parents and the psychiatrist she was seeing, she was anxious. The psychiatrist would eventually diagnose her with severe anxiety. She was insecure. She wasn't sure of herself. She wasn't liking how she felt. And all of these things were incredibly unusual for Ellen. Ellen had never really shown any signs of any kind of anxieties or anxiety disorders or anything like that growing up. She had always been incredibly confident, at least outwardly. And it seems like she was pretty open with her parents about the things she was going through. So this was really strange. And it seemed like it was happening sort of at a time when it kind of shouldn't be. I mean, she was getting married. Her job was going great. Having said that, obviously getting married is always stressful, even when you're happy. But in any event, she's feeling a lot of anxiety, and she really didn't know how to handle it because she'd never experienced this before in her life. When asked why she was upset, Ellen would tell her psychiatrist that it was all related to her job. Remember, Ellen is a school teacher. In fact, she's a first grade teacher. Now, look, I've never taught school. I would think teaching first graders is easier, more fun, and more fulfilling than teaching like high schoolers. I'm sure it is stressful. But for those of you who are thinking first grade, that doesn't seem that stressful, why would that stress you out? It wasn't just that. So however stressful it is to teach first graders, which I don't know, she's also very involved in her school. She's serving on several boards, including the hiring committee. She's really one of the leaders in her school, and she probably felt a lot of pressure to make sure that everything was going well in the school. And you might be thinking, well, Sam's probably part of this too. Maybe, but according to Ellen, he wasn't. Obviously, her psychiatrist asked her about Sam, and Ellen would say that she had no problems with him whatsoever, that he was not abusive in any way. And in fact, her psychiatrist would recall that when Ellen talked about Sam, she would have this sort of wistful smile on her face. You can just sort of imagine this, like looking off in the distance, smiling, thinking about Sam and how happy Sam made her. And although her parents would eventually sour on Sam after Ellen was killed and so many questions were raised about how she died, at the time, they told the police that they had no knowledge of abuse and that Sam was a fine young man. They had no reservations about their relationship and really had no reason to suspect him of any kind of shortcomings whatsoever. So, if you think this is some sort of murder and if you think Sam's involved, the lead up to it, Ellen's not really giving us any evidence, at least when she's talking to her psychiatrist, to lead you to believe that Sam is one of the reasons she's dealing with whatever issues she's dealing with.
And some of you may be thinking, why are there questions about abuse anyways from her psychiatrist? This is a pretty typical question for the psychiatrist to ask, especially if Ellen seems to be, doing well in her career, in a good relationship, about to get married, and never have struggled with the kind of insecurity and anxiety that she was all of a sudden now facing in her kind of late 20s. That's not usually the first time you see those sorts of struggles. And so the psychiatrist is trained to see if there's any triggering factor. Unfortunately, a common trigger for these symptoms in young women is being in abusive relationships. And another thing that psychiatrists and doctors are trained to know is that many women in abusive relationships do not even recognize that they are in abusive relationships. So I don't think it's strange at all that her psychiatrist is asking her whether she's in an abusive relationship, because the psychiatrist is just trying to kind of get to the core of what's happening, because the anxiety and the insecurity, those are just symptoms of something else. Something is causing all of this. This is just the effects of what's happening. But like Brett said, she was asked the question, and it doesn't seem like she's in any duress or anything like that when she answers that, Sam is not part of the problem at all.
And another thing, psychiatrists are trained to know when you're not telling them the truth. And that is one of the things they look for. We call it, in a lot of our things, in the criminal side, when we're having people evaluated, there's something called malingering. And basically, it's when the person who's being evaluated is attempting to mislead the psychiatrist in whatever way. So if they're trying to show they aren't competent to stand trial, they'll intentionally do worse on the competency test than even someone who was incompetent will do. Or if they're trying to show that they were insane at the time of the crime, whatever the issue is, they will attempt to mislead the psychiatrist, and psychiatrists are really good, and they're trained to see through that, because people aren't always honest with their psychiatrist. They're not always honest with their doctor. I mean, the last time you went to the doctor and they asked you how much you drank, did you tell them the truth? Were you like, I'm 8 or 9 drinks every Friday night? Probably not, right? You were like, a little bit, not too much, a healthy amount, right? Same thing with psychiatrists. If you are in an abusive relationship and you're really just looking for some sort of help and maybe some medication, maybe you're kind of embarrassed by that. There's all sorts of reasons you wouldn't tell your psychiatrist, oh yeah, I'm having all these terrible problems with my boyfriend. I mean, maybe you would, but certainly there are people who would lie and do lie, and it's just not something that's unusual. It doesn't seem like, in this case at least, that the psychiatrist thought that Ellen was misleading her.
Yeah, but here's something interesting. Ellen had met with her psychiatrist, and her psychiatrist's name was Ellen Berman, 3 times in the month of January. And during those meetings, Ellen expressed anxiety over work, and she didn't know if she should quit her job or work through it. After their first meeting on January 12th, Berman prescribed Zoloft, but this didn't really do what Ellen needed, which is to help with her anxiety. So Berman prescribed Xanax on January 17th. This is really interesting, first of all, because of course, when you start new medication, you should be in contact with your prescriber to let them know how it's working. But you see that she's coming back just 5 days later saying that the Zoloft isn't working. That's a pretty short amount of time, but it must mean that her anxiety was getting so intense that she didn't want to wait a week to see if the Zoloft would kick in, if it would get better. She kind of went back to Berman and said, I really need something else. This isn't working within the week. And then that isn't even enough. So 2 days later, Berman actually prescribes Ellen Ambien and Klonopin on January 19th. And after Ellen began taking the Klonopin, she called her mom thrilled that finally there was a dramatic change and this drug worked on her and she no longer felt anxious. So it really seems in that span of basically 1 week between January 12th and 19th, she's in such a state that she goes back to her psychiatrist 3 times and gets a total of 5 prescriptions, all to treat anxiety. I'm not saying any of that's wrong. I don't think she was pill seeking or anything like that. I think that just speaks to how much anxiety she had, that it felt so unmanageable that she needed a pill to make it go away.
And let me just say this. People who are anxious can get murdered. Just because you're anxious doesn't mean if you die, it's a suicide. But there are people who act as though there was no reason to think Ellen was suicidal at all, and this is completely out of the blue, and there's no way it was suicide because everything was perfect. And that's just not true. Ellen was definitely struggling with something. Whether it was enough to sort of lead to a suicide is hard to say, but I think Alice makes some really good points. She clearly was kind of desperate. She was dealing with something that was really bothering her to the extent that 5 days is all she gave the Xanax. I mean, there's no way I would go to the psychiatrist, get a drug, and then only 5 days later give up on it. I just can't even imagine doing it.
Usually prescribers will tell you to at least give it a week, maybe 2, because they change kind of the chemical balances in your body and it takes time. It's not a light on and off switch. It's not Benadryl that knocks you out for the night. This is like changing your chemical makeup to balance it. And so it takes time for it to take effect. And so most prescribers will actually tell you, wait a week. Like, let's see how this plays out.
And I think the fact that the psychiatrist was willing to immediately take her off of it and put her on Klonopin, which is a pretty serious drug, also tells you what she thought, that she took her concerns very seriously and thought this was a pretty serious anxiety disorder that she was suffering from. And these are the things, when you think about, is this suicide or murder, if you want to keep an open mind here, these are the kind of things that are, checks in the suicide camp, that clearly Ellen was dealing with stuff right before she was killed.
And those of you who may not be as familiar with Klonopin, it's a benzodiazepine. And those who are critical of it and other benzos have called it the most dangerous drug in America. 1/3 of the people who take it for longer than 4 weeks develop a dependency on it, so it's highly addictive. And suicide is a known side effect of Klonopin. Now, of course, Ellen had only been taking Klonopin for less than a week. I mean, she had another appointment with her psychiatrist the very next day for her psychiatrist to follow up because Klonopin is a powerful drug. But, I mean, she had just been on it for, at this point, 5 days, maybe 6 days, something like that. Really not a very long time on this benzo. And the addiction data shows kind of the effects after taking it for 4 weeks. Here, Ellen hadn't even been taking it for 1 week. And if you want to add in the other things that she was taking, she'd only been on any sort of antidepressant for about a week at this point, a week and a half.
Yeah. Now, she thought the Klonopin was working for her, so you also have to believe, if this were a suicide, that the Klonopin, like Al said, it's only a week, that it started working, everything was going great, but then it stopped working that quickly. I mean, it's a very short timeline here for between when she starts taking this and when she does die. Now, this is not the only thing that would lead you to think this might be a suicide. There's also Ellen's search history. We've said before there was nothing on the computer that indicated suicide. And when you say that, what you mean is there's not a note, there's no sort of very recent searches on how to stab yourself to death, right? She didn't do any of that the day she was killed. Remember, her last use of the computer is like 4 o'clock, 4:30 or so. There's nothing from that time period that would indicate suicide. But if you go further back and you look at her search history, you do kind of start to see those things. So on December 18th, 2010, before Ellen went to the doctor, before she started seeing a psychiatrist, she did Google suffocation and suicide methods. On January 10th, which was only a couple weeks before her death, she Googled quick death, read an article about euthanasia, and ended up on a religious website about painless suicide, which actually concluded that there was no painless suicide because anyone who dies by suicide will go to hell. Apparently a very strange website. Probably not what she was looking for, but anyway, sort of these are the kind of things that she was looking at. So it's not as if suicide wasn't something that she had thought about. Query this. I know people get really, really worked up about their jobs. I know that happens. It is hard for me to believe that these searches and her deep level of anxiety are really about her job, that they are really driven solely about what's going on at the school, whether she should quit her job or not. It's just hard for me to believe, and I'm not saying it's not possible, so don't judge me, but it's just hard for me to believe that she's Googling suffocation and suicide methods because she can't decide whether or not she wants to remain as a first grade teacher. I think there was a lot more going on in her life, once again, that we don't know about. I just think there's a big black box around this case, and a lot of the details, really the important details that would answer a lot of these questions and clear up a lot of this confusion, seems to be things that we just don't know, that is being hidden from us by people for whatever reason. And I feel like the depth of Ellen's struggles and the cause of those is one of the things that we just don't really know the answer to.
Yeah, a couple observations here. First of all, it does not surprise me at all that Ellen actually made these Google searches based on the kind of flurry of prescriptions and flurry of psychiatrist visits in January. She clearly was struggling. She clearly was in a dark place. She clearly had anxiety, and she was trying to deal with it. That's why she saw her psychiatrist 3 times in a week and was asking for help. She could have taken that Zoloft and it could have not worked, and she could have just fallen into oblivion and thrown up her hands and been like, this is what I thought. Nothing can help me. That's not how she dealt with it. She dealt with it as if someone who wanted to get better. That's why she was so happy when the Klonopin finally worked and she called her mom thrilled. There are different types of depression, of course, but this actually fits what we know about her. She doesn't seem to have a kind of disposition to anxiety or depression, but rather this was almost sudden onset later in life. And the fact that she wanted to get out of this state says a lot about her disposition to begin with. This was not her natural state. And that's why she was so anxious to get out of this immense period of anxiety. Second, she Googles things about painless death, or at least she's led to articles that talk about painless death and euthanasia and suffocation. Those typically, at least from a layperson's perspective, is something like akin to going to sleep and not waking up. Nowhere in here do you see self-torture sorts of searches. You don't Google quick death if you're looking to draw it out and make it a long, painful death. We don't see any indications that she's been cutting herself over time, kind of the small steps, right, of releasing that anxiety by cutting herself on her arms and on her wrists. We don't see that. And so even though I am not surprised she makes these Google searches, I don't think these Google searches go to the method, if she were to choose to kill herself, of 20 stab wounds around her body in major organs at all.
No, I agree 100%. I mean, the method of her death is completely inconsistent with what she's Googling. And this goes back to something we said several times, and I just think is rock solid true, and really the only thing we can be sure of in this case is maybe she had suicidal thoughts. She was not planning on committing suicide that day. She certainly wasn't planning on committing suicide this way. If she died by suicide, it's because there was some trigger that sent her into some sort of rage, and this was just the nearest thing, and she jumped on it, and she just attacked herself in a rage, really. No way this is planned. No way this is something she was thinking about doing. And I think that's just confirmed by what Alice is saying. If this were a planned suicide and she was researching how to do it, she certainly did not follow through on the things she found. And once again, this is a very important point, and it's certainly evidence, and it's certainly something that points towards suicide. But also, there are a lot of reasons you might be thinking about suicide that put you in a position where you also might be susceptible to being murdered. There are things in your life that could lead to depression and anxiety and suicidal thoughts that also are dangerous to you. And I don't think you can necessarily rule those out. And just because, like I said, this is important, it's important evidence. If this was a clear case of suicide, this would really push me towards a suicide camp. But because of everything else we're seeing, I'm keeping my mind open here. I don't think necessarily just because 2 weeks before or a month before she's Googling painless suicide, that means she stabbed herself to death 20 times, including 8 times in the back of the neck. So important to know, but keep an open mind. And another thing I'm sure of is that we are not going to finish this in 4 episodes, Alice. We were wildly optimistic.
You know what? It's going to be really funny, though, when this episode comes out, because we can title it like Part 4 of Not 4.
Yeah. Sorry about that, guys. We didn't mean to mislead you. It's just, look, there's so much in this case, and there's so much that's worthy of discussion. It's the reason we didn't do this case because it's not interesting or not worthy of discussion. And it's just, there's so much going on, and there's so much more left to talk about next week, which will be our final episode. We'll definitely get through it next week. We're going to come back to the police's conclusion, why they reached that conclusion, and some really bad decisions the police made in light of their conclusion that this was a suicide. Decisions that, frankly, may make it impossible to ever know exactly what happened here. We're going to talk more about the autopsy. We're going to talk about some of these things that we've talked about before, including this wound on the spinal cord, and how there was an expert who looked at that and said, oh, there's no damage to the spinal cord. That is not accurate, and we're going to tell you how. Also, we'll talk about some of the other experts, the outside experts who've looked at this case and what they've concluded. And then we'll bring you up to date on what's happening right now, the legal maneuvers that are happening right now that may give us more clarity on what's happening in this case. And then we will talk about our theories about whether this is suicide or murder. And as you can tell, that would take us a very long time to discuss, and so we're not going to squeeze that into 10 minutes here at the end of the episode. You guys have been great about talking about this case and getting back to us on your thoughts. We want to hear more from you. Shoot us an email, prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Hello to those of you on YouTube. Leave a comment on the video, like, and subscribe. I think that's what we're supposed to tell you to do. And hello to those of you listening to this episode early and ad-free on Patreon. We love you guys. We always enjoy hearing your thoughts on these cases. Alice, before we sign off, is there anything else you want to say?
Oh, I knew we weren't going to finish today, but I'm glad we're not rushing through it, because even as we are talking, I've still only said like 80% of what I'm thinking, because there's just so much to discuss here. So I'm glad we get to come back and keep discussing.
And we will do that, though likely this is the last time, Alice, we will record as 2 prosecutors, but that's okay, because you're still a litigator, and that's basically the same thing. You're just, you're just a different courtroom, different kind of law, but it's okay. Like I said, it's just going to add to the diversity of our knowledge. You're going to be able to tell us so much about civil law, and we can't wait to do that. So if you guys have any civil questions you want to ask, now we have an expert. We have an in-house expert on civil law.
Back to my FOIA days.
There you go. Alice is really going home. She was a civil lawyer before. Now she's been a prosecutor. She's done that. And so now it's time to go and do the civil stuff again. And we are so excited for her. Congratulations, Alice. We love you. And just, don't be a stranger. I hope to still see you. Just because I won't share a wall with you anymore doesn't mean that we can't hang out. So, well, that's all I have to say for today. We'll be back next week with the conclusion in this case. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors.
like that person on the gallery who was like, I really need you to do Jeffrey McDonald. I need your opinion. And then it was
That was hilarious.
oops, I already listened.
I know, that was hilarious.
That
The fact
was
they
so
had
funny.
already listened. Because a lot of times people say, I really wish you'd cover this. And it's like, we covered it in episode 30. And they're like, oh, I didn't go back that far.
Right. But she
to be
actually
like-
listened, which was so great.
That was hilarious. They were a good sport about it, too.
No, it was really cute. It was very cute.
Take our time. We just take our time. If it's 5, it's 5. If it's
Like you
4, it's
said,
4.
like you said, Heather can do this better in 45 minutes, so we might as well do our shtick, which is we cover it
might
in
as well do
45
our thing.
hours.
Exactly. Like you want to, exactly. 45 minutes
She
worth
does
of
45
content
minutes, we
in
take 45
hours.
We love you, Heather.
Saddle up and get ready for Westerns Weeks on PlutoTV, all for free. We're coming in blazing with favorites like True Grit and Once Upon a Time in Mexico. Or immerse yourself in binge-worthy series like Yellowstone and Walker, Texas Ranger. Plus, PlutoTV has hundreds of channels with thousands more movies, TV shows, and more. The best part? It's free. No credit card, no sign-up, no fees. Download the Pluto TV app on all your favorite devices and start streaming now.